Hi everyone, and welcome back to probably what is going to be one of my favourite lists of all time. We're going to look at some Cyberpunk games on the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, so we've picked, I think there's 11 in total here that we're going to talk about. We wanted to pick games that really encapsulated that kind of cyberpunk world. I mean, I'll say up front now, we're both big fans of the original Blade Runner. So anything that was inspired by that world, that type of dystopian future, will certainly have a chance of being on here.
As always, if you do want to save and support the channel, you can use code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg to buy your eShop credit or other games.
Lovely. So which games have we picked? Well, let's find out. Let's get an obvious one out of the way with what I said a moment ago then, and let's start with Blade Runner Enhanced.
Yeah, this originally came out on the PC. I remember buying it with a little crystal case, and you load it up, and the very first scene essentially sees you in that. There's the little rainy cafe scene.
Yes, yeah.
You basically start in that location. Well, that's not true. You actually start at a pet shop and then you go there. But that's the bit that stuck out in my memory as like, wow, they've really nailed the atmosphere of the films,
Yeah, no, I mean, just on Blade Runner in general, not necessarily this game, but what I loved about it, what I kind of alluded to just now, was the way that the world was almost built up of the old, but then the new built on top of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like this utopian world where everything was perfect. It was kind of the remnants of an older world with the future technology placed on top. And the further down you went to ground level, the grimier things became.
Yeah.
And this game really does get that, doesn't it?
Gets it perfectly. It's funny, isn't it? You just basically described the feeling that Blade Runner gives you.
Yeah.
You're like in awe of the world, but you're also a bit horrified by it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of our cyberpunk, if you like. And this game, I mean, it does have its flaws these days. It's not perfect, is it?
No, see, at the moment, it's really not perfect on Switch. This was supposed to be kind of an improved version from Night Dive Studios, but they had some real issues bringing it across. Now, what I can say is behind the scenes, they're working on an extensive patch for this. So when you go check out our review, you'll be like, hang on, that looks worse than the original, and that is the case. But they're working on bringing it up to the level it should be, because they're huge fans of it as well, and I think they're quite disappointed they had to release it in that way.
Yeah, so one that perhaps hold off on, but we just couldn't really not mention it, bearing in mind our influences. But with that said, let's move on to the next one, and we have Shadowrun Trilogy.
Yeah, again, another from my youth, I sat there playing these back in the day. Weirdly, actually, it came to mobile as well at one point, and I started replaying through these. They're isometric, top-down, I guess they're almost classic RPGs in one sense. You have turn-based combat that uses different augmented abilities, and you can really see the influence on games like Deus Ex, which came out a few years later. Amazing game, by the way. I'd love to see that brought across the Switch. That would run well. But these, I mean, what can you say?
Yeah, I mean, I've never played these ones, but I did play one of my favourite Super Nintendo games was Shadowrun.
Oh, okay.
But it was very different, and I loved that game because you woke up in a morgue. You were presumed dead, and you woke up and kind of like freaked out the staff there, and then you escaped and you ran off into this world and you didn't know who you are. Yeah. Classic amnesia trope, but it was handled very well, and you ended up kind of in these underground factions and. The controls were terrible because you had to move a cursor with a D-pad, but I loved that game, and I love that Shadowrun world.
It sounds very similar to one of these games. In fact, maybe one of these is the modern version of that.
Possibly. I mean, that wasn't turn-based. That was.
I'm pretty sure at the start of the first in this trilogy, you wake up in a morgue.
So maybe they paid homage to that game. Yeah, but these again, just that classic cyberpunk feel running through them, and good games. Right, next we've got one that's very different actually. It's called Valhalla, and this is, I guess it's a visual novel, really would be the best way to describe it, where you play as a bartender and you serve the patrons as they come in for their drinks. And as each one comes in, you'll get to know them, and they'll ask you for a drink of some description. Sometimes flat out just ask for it by name, but other times they'll just say, I'm feeling pretty this, give me something that, and you have to use the ingredients at your disposal to make this drink for them. And the happier they are with your service, the more they'll start to talk to you, and you start to learn a lot about the world around you and these characters and how they live and interact in this world. Quite very much an adult story.
Yeah.
But a great one if you like visual novels. Really, I found it so intriguing. Every night I was picking it up to get a bit further in and find out more about these characters. And you have to do well enough to keep your job at the same time.
It's really cool. There's actually, like you said the Coffee Talk, didn't you? Did you say Coffee Talk?
Coffee Talk is another one that's quite similar.
Very similar. Yeah,
Yes.
there's almost a genre that's come up. The Red Strings Club as well.
Another one, yep.
That all use that similar mechanic. But I highly recommend any of those games, actually.
Yeah.
They all kind of fit in there.
Yeah, they're just a very different breed. But as long as you're happy to read as part of your gaming experience, then you'll enjoy this one.
Loads of people just left the chat.
Yeah, exactly. Right, let's move back to something maybe a bit more traditional then, if you like, and that's Observer.
Yeah, so Observer featured the image, the visage of Rutger Hauer,
Yeah.
as well as his voice,
Yeah.
as he plays the main detective in the game. And it's a first person, isn't it? It switches to the first person view, I'm pretty sure.
It's first person for that, yeah.
And you're essentially in this tower block, investigating something that's gone down. I don't want to spoil it, but it has a bit of a horror element. It makes a few missteps. Like, I love the whole detective side of things, you know, where you're using special cameras to look in certain things, and you can change his visor so that you can see into like the digital world or the biological, and then investigate different bits. It made a few missteps for me when it switched to the chase horror, you know, where you have someone after you, a la Outlast.
Yes, Outlast.
Yeah.
Well, this was, as far as I can remember at least, this is from Bloober Team, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course they did Layers of Fear, and Layers of Fear 2 had the exact same problem, as far as I'm concerned. They did the atmospheric side of it very well.
Yes.
They had Tony Todd, Candyman, as the voice. Fantastic, you know, brilliant. But then every so often you'd be chased, and it just fell apart a little bit, you know?
Yeah, and here it just felt like they were having a refined, like, focused scope is good.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels like they need to go somewhere else. Like, it becomes quite samey. You know, you're in a very small area. The whole game takes place in that really small tower block. And like I said, it can be really good, but I felt like it worked against it at some points. I felt like I needed to just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
The city looked so interesting, and I was like, oh, okay.
Show me more.
Yeah,
and this one doesn't, as far as I know, unless it was a limited release, I don't believe it was, it doesn't have a physical edition on the Switch, but it does on the PS4, which is a shame. Well, it's not a shame, it's great. I've got it on the PS4, but it's a shame it didn't come to Switch too. Right, next we have quite an interesting one, because this is almost like a long-awaited sequel, isn't it? This is Beyond a Steel Sky.
Yeah, so it is exactly that. It's a long-awaited sequel that we hoped would eventually arrive, and I think it's almost like the conditions for it with the Switch and with just the way consoles are in general have finally come around in terms of technology, that they can make the same world in this 3D way, and it's slightly cheaper than it would have been a few years back, now that you've got all these engines like Unreal Engine. But it really does almost require you to have played the original Beneath a Steel Sky to fully appreciate a lot of the references and things. It's very much for the fans. Now, that being said, I don't think you would need to have played those. It feels like a point-and-click adventure in the same way as the new Monkey Island has adapted that, so you control the character directly, but you've got access to all your inventory and skills and things in a reasonably simplistic way without having to drag a cursor all over the place. It's a good game. I did really enjoy this. I haven't actually finished this one yet, I have to say. It's one of those where you need to dedicate some serious time to it.
It's a shame they didn't package in the older game as part of, because you've got like, I've been going back now, but there was an Indiana Jones game on the Wii, for example, which put in as a bonus the old classic point-and-click indie game. Was it something of Atlantis? I can't think what it's called. Fate of Atlantis. That was it. It's nice when they do little things like that, even if it's an unlockable. You know, that would have been nice.
Yeah, do you know what? You've maybe really want to go back and play it now. I think you can play it on mobile if you're interested.
Oh, nice. Okay, again, this is very different now. We're going to look at Huntdown. Now, Huntdown is a 2D run and gun, playable with two players if you're able to get someone to join you. And this is fantastic. We said it before in another video. It has that Warriors feel to it in terms of the world, but whereas the Warriors was very much late 70s, this is kind of like that near future version of it, isn't it? Having to get through the streets and survive. Although this time, to be fair, you are the hunter, because you are a bounty hunter trying to take down the leader of a number of different factions. So you'll run through each level, and then the boss for each one will be that leader for that gang, and then once you've cleared them out, you'll move on to somewhere else.
Yeah, this has got like a really succinct, tight gameplay loop, hasn't it? You've got the cover mechanics.
Yep.
You've got quite easy shooting, some very cool different weapons, and there's a bit of a strategy in trying to keep a good weapon loaded for the final boss.
Yeah, exactly right.
Really enjoyable game. Quite tough last boss, but you know, it is very different to the ones we've mentioned because it's fully action. And you can just pick it up and play.
Yeah, and it's very satisfying when you finally beat it. It definitely has that satisfying feeling to it. Right, next then we've got Ghostrunner.
Yeah, so again, another action-oriented cyberpunk game is Ghostrunner. This one has a parkour mechanic to it, whereby each area that you enter is almost its own little puzzle, but there's combat in there as well. I really didn't like this for the first hour that I played it. I was like, I don't get this, because you die with a single hit, but you kill with a single hit as well. And when it first came out on Switch, it was just such a mess, I couldn't control it. Now it's all patched up now, and it's when it actually runs the way it should, it's really nice to control. So you can hold a trigger to slow time for a few seconds to allow you to then go and target a specific enemy.
Right.
There's that thing where you pull the trigger to do like a katana swipe, and it will either deflect their bullet, which is pretty sweet in itself, or it will just do that one hit, slice their head off, kill.
Nice.
It's cool. Good game.
It's funny how many of these cyberpunk games implement katanas.
Why wouldn't you?
That'll make you right, yeah. Absolutely. Well, this next one doesn't, that's for sure. This is Neocab. This is very similar to Valhalla, the one that we mentioned earlier. And then again, it's probably a visual novel if you were to class it as something. Whereas this time you are a cab driver, and again, it has that lovely cyberpunk feel to it. You are a character that's just moved to a new town. You're going to live with your friend, and you turn up in this new area, and they're not there. You don't know where they are. You can't find them. And you have to kind of complete your night's route anyway, and kind of, you know, put off finding them for now. And obviously, as the game goes on, that story develops. But again, it just has that really interesting idea of conversing with people, the people in the back of your cab, and the answers that you give to their questions, or just the way you interact with them, will determine how much money they give you at the end of your journey. And you have to make enough money to be kept on by the company, and if you're not, obviously that's it.
Yeah, this has for me a bit of a feel. If you've played Route 96, I think it's Route 96 or Road 96.
Routes, isn't it?
It's Route, isn't it? It has that same feel, so that your journey never feels quite the same if you're playing multiple times based on who you pick up. You decide to pick up, you know.
Absolutely.
It changes the feel of it, and it changes the story to some degree as well.
Yes, it does. I mean, I would say, having finished both of these, if you're going to pick one, I enjoyed Valhalla more. But this I did really like, and I liked the view. It sounds strange, but the camera is almost as if it's on the dashboard, looking back at you, the driver, and then the passengers in the back seat. Yeah. It's just quite interesting, an interesting way that you can see the reactions of both people and what have you, you know?
Yeah.
Next then we've got Gamedec, which I'm going to let Mark talk about because he knows more about it than me, but I did like the premise of this one, in that you kind of delve into, you're almost like a detective that delves into people's dreams, is that right?
Yeah, I guess this is most similar, in terms of the ones we've talked about, it's probably most similar to Shadowrun, but from a slightly different perspective. You're still isometric, but it's slightly more zoomed in. Very tight storytelling, I guess, you go into, but there is an element of choice there as well. Like, you can have characters die and then play through again and do things slightly differently, and they survive. So I always like that, you know, I always like choices to actually be mortally impactful, I'm going to call it. You know? Like, it means something. This has loads of different game worlds that you go in, and there's been a crime in there, so someone might have been murdered within their VR world, and it's actually happened to them, and you go in. What's cool about that is it means that the people that you meet in these places have got weird avatars, so you'll be like chatting to a unicorn,
right?
But like the unicorn, because it's quite adult, the unicorn in real life will be a bit of a predator,
right?
So they'll be, you're looking at unicorn, but they're speaking in a like quite sinister way, and
I
you're
see.
like, ooh, this isn't cool.
Yeah, it's almost like a modern day fable for, you know, be careful who you speak to, I guess, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. You're right, actually. It does a lot of parallels to that kind of like online, the safety online stuff, and it plays with that a little bit. But it's a good game. They did, I think I've mentioned before, they've released the expanded version with a load of a new story and things like that for completely free. So, you know, if you bought it originally, you can just download that. And yeah, I enjoyed this one.
Lovely. Right, next one is State of Mind, it's called, which comes via Daedalic. And this is one that I imported, the physical version, way back when, a few years ago now. It's now more readily available, I believe, but I got it from Germany. And this is, I guess, kind of like Beyond the Steel Sky in some respects. You know, that third-person world to explore. And the story is it's quite an interesting one, where you start the game in a car crash, you have a car crash, and then you're pulled out, and obviously you heal up a bit, and you go home, and your wife and child are missing. They're not there. Now, you have quite a fractious relationship with your wife, so at first, is it like, has she just left, or, you know, but then obviously, again, as it goes on, you'll find out more. What I would say about this one is not a huge amount of gameplay, like pure gameplay. You know, it is a lot of walking around. There are puzzles to solve, but it's more about that story. You know, you'd play it for the story.
Yeah, it's most akin to something like Fahrenheit from back in the day, made by I forget his name. He's made loads of games.
Yeah, I know. You know who we mean. Yeah.
It's most akin to that in that it draws attention to the mundane and makes those part of gameplay. So you'll have to go and make a coffee or make your kids some food and things like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's very. I love the world it built. I mean, you have you go home and you have like an automated butler, if you like, whatever you want to call him.
Butler.
Yeah, pretty much. And he doesn't like this man doesn't. He's very much against what the world's become. He's very old school in a world that's constantly changing, and he doesn't like this robot in his house, and it's just the conversations that you have with those. It's almost like an interactive movie, like as you said with games like Heavy Rain and that. Not quite on that scale, certainly not on that budget, but it tells a good story.
Absolutely.
Wealth.
Last but not least then, probably my favourite on this list, oh that's a big statement, is Anno Mutationem. Now this came out quite recently, and it combines, and it's probably my favourite because it combines most of the elements from this. So you've got the storytelling aspects that we see in things like Gamedec and what's the O? Begins with O? Observer.
Yeah.
That one as well. It's got those storytelling aspects, but it's also got the action elements from some of the other ones. Not as heavy as Huntdown and things like that, but it does have like real-time action-based combat sections. This is really cool. So you start out in a city as this female protagonist, and there are lots of side quests and weird little quirky things. It's what I liked about the old Japanese RPGs. It was the quirkier aspects, and weirdly, like my memories of things like Final Fantasy VII aren't the big moments, like when you first meet Sephiroth and stuff like that. It's the going to the Saucer theme park in the sky and playing a weird chocobo race,
Okay.
And this does the same thing. You have this ridiculous fighting tournament in the town square there, and it's like, what on earth is this doing in this game?
Right. Okay.
And it's those moments that stick out. Now, very good game. I really do recommend you check out our full review of this one if you're interested. I'm not sure if there's a physical of this one.
I believe that, there's certainly one on PlayAsia,
right?
Because I've seen it. I don't know about elsewhere.
Okay.
There is a link down there to PlayAsia, by the way, if you want to have a look at that. But if you know that it's been localized, then of course let us know, or let everyone know that if it's more readily available.
But really good game, and as all of these are, well worth checking out. Now there are a lot more than this, so I'm just going to briefly go over some of those. To add in a few honourable mentions that definitely need to be on this list, you've got Transistor, which was the sequel to Bastion, which is a really fantastic take on the genre and mixes up the gameplay all over the place with different elements. It might not have been as good as Bastion for me, but yeah, it's still well worth adding to your list and is usually on sale. There's Disjunction, which Glen reviewed for us on the channel, which was inspired by the tech noir classics and is a stealth action RPG that focuses heavily on the narrative elements as well. There's a little bit of Metal Gear Solid in there in terms of being able to take things stealthily or a bit more overt, but I know he enjoyed it. A slightly different genre, but still within the same theme, I'd say. The outstanding Katana Zero, which reminded me so much of the film Leon, about the assassin who befriends the girl and basically tries to improve her life while defending her from that classic villain. Now, I had hoped we would see a sequel to this one, but it hasn't arrived just yet. But it utilises a bullet time mechanic and sees you moving from screen to screen, essentially completing action-based puzzles. They're not puzzles in the traditional sense, but there's that puzzle element to getting all of your movements just right. It's a very fun game. I really enjoyed it, and there's nothing quite like knocking back an incoming enemy bullet at just the right moment and then slicing their head off. Now, if you're after a more traditional style RPG cyberpunk game, then check out Dex. It has a 2D side-scrolling aspect, but it's actually a fully open world. There are several factions, lots of quest lines, and you can usually handle problems in a few different ways. Metroidvania fans shouldn't skip on Axiom Verge and its sequel. Now, the first one I would say is probably the better of the two games, but having completed the sequel, it's still worth playing. It just goes a little bit too off the wall, but still very fun titles. It would be wrong not to mention Akane just briefly. One of the best loading games on Switch, easy to pick up and play, always on sale, and a one-hit, one-kill, build up your charge, and annihilate every enemy on the screen just to try and get those high scores while upgrading your weapons and pistol. Quality game, amazing soundtrack. One that hasn't had much love is Jack Move. This didn't come out that long ago. Kinda had a Final Fantasy VII feel to it for me, but it's all set within that cyberpunk future. It's really good, this. Definitely one to add to your wish list if you like the kind of classic RPG top-down look, but with some hacking in there. It does combat slightly differently, but well worth it. There are loads of other games that we could talk about. Please do let me know in the comments any Cyberpunk games that you like as well. I know there are ones like Citizen Sleeper, Red Strings Club, Chinatown Detective Agency, Sense, a Cyberpunk ghost story, and also not to forget Seventh Sector. But we don't want the list to go on forever. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that covers off the best Cyberpunk games, at least that we've played on the Switch.
Yeah, like we said, it's not just about gameplay with this particular video. This is more about a world built, an atmosphere, story, and these, as Mark just said, are some of our favourites that encompass all of those elements. With all that said, just a quick thank you to our patrons, of course, and our channel members for your continued support. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.